In our last lesson, we took a look at what human qualities and emotions are and pondered how they can arise or come to be associated with particular human experiences. To help identify the qualities and emotions explored in our texts, we looked at some useful models, including the Big Five personality traits and Robert Plutchik's emotional colour wheel. Today, we'll be addressing the anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies within human behaviour and motivation. Let's start with the first sentence of the second paragraph of the rubric. Texts may give insight into the anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies in human behaviour and motivations. We will explore each of these anomalies, paradoxes, and then inconsistencies, while asking how and why they appear in human behaviour and motivation. This lesson will help you expand your vocabulary and develop more sophisticated ideas in your essays. So, what are anomalies in human behaviour or motivation? Basically, an anomaly is something different from what is normally expected. In every human society, there are standards of how we should normally behave. Some of these standards are written in law. For example, in Australia, we have laws against killing or hurting other people, stealing from them, and defacing their property. Other standards of acceptable behaviour are less concrete and relate more to unspoken social norms and customs. For example, there's no law against being a messy eater in a fancy restaurant, but we all follow the social expectation to be polite. And many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people groups have complex social norms about family relationships and caring for the land. Social norms aren't just about behaviour, they also shape our motivations and goals in life. As we go through school and university, we learn various skills that gear us towards taking up certain roles within our communities, such as doctors, lawyers, accountants, and so on. We are also taught to value certain ideas, to try our best, to act intelligently, to strive for success in our careers, to be kind and empathetic, and to help others. An anomaly, however, is any behaviour or motivation that somehow differs or deviates from these sorts of standards and expectations. While you read your text, ask questions like these. Do your characters deviate from social norms? Are their actions and motives anomalous to the rest of society? This section of the rubric enables us to look at deviant aspects of human behaviour and to contemplate why these behaviours occur. Think about crime. Why do people commit crimes? Does crime arise from particular negative human experiences, or are criminal acts spontaneous? Think about the nature versus nurture debate, which we discussed earlier in our lesson on human qualities and emotions. Basically, the nature versus nurture debate is the disagreement about whether behaviour and motivations are part of someone's inbuilt nature or due to their nurture, that is, their experiences throughout life. In your texts, were the antagonists, the bad guys, born bad, or did their past experiences make them who they are? Maybe anomalous behaviour and motivation spring from a combination of nature and nurture. When you look at cultural deviancy, ask what assumptions in our society make a particular behaviour anomalous. In some cultures, like in the West, people are quick to identify someone who hears voices as mentally ill or schizophrenic. The anomalous experience of hearing voices is explained as a mental illness. However, a recent study interviewed people from America, Ghana, and India who all reported hearing voices. The Ghanaians and Indians were much more likely to think about the voices they heard in a positive light, while the Americans had very negative experiences. So you can see that different cultures often understand anomalies in different ways. When reading our texts, sometimes characters may act in ways that are anomalous with their prior characterisation. Remember, characterisation is the way authors represent the distinct qualities of each character. For example, a good character may impulsively perform an act of evil. If this occurs, try to account for this anomaly. Did a particular situation trigger this? How does the character explain this anomaly within their identity? Does it change who they are? These aren't easy questions, but when you tackle them, your teacher will appreciate your insight. Next up is paradoxes in human behaviour and motivation. Paradoxes are a bit different from anomalies. While anomalies refer to deviant behaviours that are hard to understand, paradoxes are contradictions that on the surface may be unexplainable, but after careful investigation may be resolvable, or at least understandable. To understand paradoxes, don't just interpret a character's surface behaviour or intentions. Instead, we have to look for deeper or latent psychological drives. Let's work through some examples together. Try to spot the paradoxes as we go. Let's meet John. He is charismatic and confident. He always shows off by boasting about how great his life is and spends a lot of time trying to impress others. However, when John spends time alone with his thoughts, he feels miserable, weak, and inferior to his peers. Can you spot the paradox or contradiction? How can John be confident and have low self-esteem? Let's try to resolve the paradox. In this case, John's showy self-confidence might be a way to hide his inner feelings of worthlessness. Next up, we have Sally. She is pretty quiet, preferring to spend time by herself rather than in the company of other people. Instead of going to parties, Sally prefers to spend her weekends by herself, lost within the pages of a book, painting or writing poetry. Can you spot the paradox here? Despite Sally's quiet nature, she actually has a very loud inner life. Her mind takes her on journeys full of rich imagination and fantasy. What about Oscar, the class clown? He spends all day making funny jokes and fooling around to amuse his teacher and peers. However, what his classmates don't know is that Oscar is using his humour to disguise his grief. His grandmother has just died and they were very close. This paradox is often referred to as gallows humour, which is the use of humour in a sad or hopeless situation. Another type of paradox is cognitive dissonance. This refers to the psychological distress that comes from simultaneously holding two conflicting viewpoints, or when your beliefs don't match up with your actions. For example, many smokers admit to actually hating smoking because of all the associated health risks, but they nevertheless continue to smoke. And lots of people know that we should be more environmentally friendly, but we don't really make a huge effort to change our lifestyles. We still drive a car to school instead of riding a bike, forget to recycle our paper, and use too much electricity, even though we know that it would be good to live more sustainably. Can you identify any cognitive dissonance in the characters in your texts? Maybe the author demonstrates some cognitive dissonance too by expressing conflicting viewpoints. Cognitive dissonance is a useful term to describe states of tension, indecision, and confliction. Great job. Now you're ready to start analysing the paradoxes in your texts. Perhaps the sweetest characters in your text eventually reveal themselves to be the most savage. Maybe your character professes to care about others' well-being, but is actually very self-absorbed. When you identify paradoxes, paradoxically, you often end up explaining them and thus resolving them. Always remember to supplement this with proper textual analysis. Similar to paradoxes are inconsistencies. So let's think about some inconsistencies in the way people act and think. At the end of the day, human beings aren't perfect. Even if we aspire to be the perfect husband, daughter, or student, there are going to be times when we break out of those roles. We slip up or make mistakes, fail that exam, or miss a practice session. Sometimes, despite ourselves, we behave in ways that are the opposite of how we'd like to. Inconsistencies in human behaviour and motivation refer to acts that differ from previous patterns of action or intent. Do your characters ever behave in unexpected ways? Do they ever say one thing but do the opposite? Is your character so all over the place that you can never pin down who they are or what they're up to? In each of these cases, your characters can be said to have inconsistencies in their behaviour and motivation. However, inconsistencies also refer to patterns of behaviour or motivation that are not compatible with reality. Human beings have many biases, which are opinions that we form before we get all the facts straight. Biases make us act and think in ways that are inconsistent with the rest of the world. Let's review some of these biases that might appear in your characters. First up is confirmation bias. This is when you favour information that fits with your point of view, so that you dismiss and ignore anything that contradicts your opinion. This bias is more common than you might think. Imagine that you are writing an essay on The Merchant of Venice, and you're trying to create a paragraph about the theme of gender. As you read the play, you'll be looking out for anything related to gender, but you might ignore all other information, like some of the conversations about money or religion. Can you think of any examples in the characters of your texts where they just see what they want to see and ignore more important information? Next, we have stereotyping. This is another super common bias, which is where you make big assumptions about a person or a group of people. Lots of people aren't even aware that they think about others according to stereotypes. For example, our culture is full of gender stereotypes. People might expect that you will act or think a certain way just because you are a guy or a girl. For example, in her memoir, I Am Malala, Malala Yousafzai talks about how when she was growing up, lots of people didn't want her to receive a good education just because she was a girl. Similarly, your text might explore the impact of racist stereotypes in society. In fact, characters in your text might have an ethnocentric bias, which is where they think that their own culture and ethnicity is better than others. Perhaps you are studying the text Go Back to Where You Came From, where some participants make assumptions about refugees and asylum seekers based on stereotypes. Maybe the composer of your text is trying to challenge harmful stereotypes. Another form of bias is illusory correlation. This is when you think two things are related, even when they're not. Maybe one of your text's characters is a gambler and believes that because he's wearing his lucky socks, he's destined to win big today. Or maybe your character has survivor's guilt, which is when he feels responsible for someone else's death when he actually played no part. Is your character or author happy-go-lucky all the time, believing that good things are just bound to happen to them? Maybe they have an optimism bias, the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of positive or favourable events. Some people have such a strong optimism bias that they completely ignore anything bad. This is called the ostrich effect, because ostriches sometimes hide their heads in the ground and can't see what's happening around them. Alternatively, maybe your character is down in the dumps and holds the belief that the world is an uncaring and dangerous place. In this case, your character could be called a pessimist, someone who overestimates the likelihood of negative events happening to them and for things to turn out badly. While these are just a few of the many thousands of different biases out there, reviewing some of these can be a great way to think about the ways that human beings can behave and think in ways that are illogical and inconsistent with reality. We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons on human experiences, check out our analysis of the ways human experiences can challenge assumptions, ignite new ideas, or allow for personal reflection.